Hello, and welcome to a really great subject matter today and a really great panelist. We are here to discuss the $2 trillion opportunity that aging tech represents. And it's a very exciting time to be involved in this space. My name is Joan Susie. I'm the chairman of FinXTech, and we will be talking for the next hour about the financial side of age tech. Age tech is a very broad category, often seen as health tech, social tech, but fintech's an important piece of it. And we're excited. We're very, very excited to be able to talk about that today. The fintech side of it includes things like insurance. It sometimes includes things like payments and fraud prevention, as well as wills and document preservation. I am the chairman of FinXTech and Bank Director magazine. I serve on the board of Autobooks, and I'm going to introduce our panelists. They're great. First, we have Deborah Jordan, who's the Senior Director of Design Thinking and Marketing at the AgeTech Collaborative at AARP. We have Elizabeth Chubb, the founder and CEO of MyFlock. And of course, we have Todd Rovek, who's a co-founder and CEO of Careful. I'm going to turn it over to them for just a moment so that they can introduce their companies and what they're doing a little bit. So let's start with you, Deborah. Give us a little bit more detail about what you do.
Sure. So I lead marketing and design thinking at the AgeTech Collaborative from ARP. And the AgeTech Collaborative is an ecosystem that brings together what we consider the most forward-thinking folks in the age tech space: startups, enterprises, test beds, investors, and business services, to surround the startups that collectively, as an ecosystem, are working together to make aging easier. Big challenge, but important challenge.
That's great. Thank you so much. Elizabeth?
Great. Thank you, Joan. I am Elizabeth Clubb. I'm the founder and CEO of MyFlock, and we're also part of the AgeTech Collaborative, and I'm delighted to be part of that organization. MyFlock is a fintech payments and expense management platform, really purpose-built for older adults to empower them to live on their own terms but get care. It's also to empower caregivers to take the financial friction out of caregiving and really to prevent elder fraud and financial exploitation before it happens. Really excited to be here and have this conversation. So thanks for having me.
Great. Thank you so much. Todd, tell us a little bit about you and your company.
Yeah, hi. Thanks for having me. I founded and lead a company called Careful. We're a fintech platform focused on family financial safety. We partner with banks and credit unions and wealth managers, but also have a direct-to-consumer element. And we are really focused on the $37 billion in scams and elder fraud each year that comes from lots of places. Of course, elder fraud directly, but also the fraud that comes from within the trusted circle or mistakes older adults can make themselves. And so we built an AI platform that's looking for things that banks can't find today. Everything from strange donations to money mistakes to someone paying for things in your name. And then we bundle all of that in a stack that we call full stack financial safety, from home title monitoring to identity theft insurance and password document vault, et cetera. And so that's a package we're really excited to have in the market.
That's great. So obviously we have three experts, and we just need to get rolling on that. You will be in listening only mode while you're at this webinar, and we will have a video afterwards. But if you have questions or comment, the chat is right there for you. You can just hop on in, tell us a little bit about you or what you would like to hear from any of these panelists. So let's start this. Deborah, give us the big picture. How many people are in this demographic? What's the financial clout of this? And how are you guys looking at it?
They're huge. So the 50 plus, and we generally say the 50 plus as if it's monolithic, which we know it's not. But people over 50 currently represent 35% of the US population, so a little over 118 million. But here's the interesting part. They contribute 40% towards GDP. So although they're 35%, and it's a big number, their contributions are significant. Based on 2018 data, it is estimated that the 50 plus contributed $8.3 trillion to the US economy. So that's what we talk about when we talk about the longevity economy. If you look at their actual spend, it's 7.6 trillion. But again, big numbers. So 56 cents of every dollar is spent by the 50 plus on goods and services. That was 2018, and that number is just going to grow even more. What I think is really interesting is it's a large number of people, and they represent like a bunch of different cohorts. There is the GI generation, the silent generation, baby boomers, and guess what? Gen X's coming in. And it won't be that far off before millennials are part of the 50 plus already. So that just speaks to how incredibly diverse they are. Lots of spending power. And we often joke about it. I mean, who else has disposable income but people over 50? And we are so excited that there's this focus on the power of the 50 plus and their influence, because we at ARP and the AgeTech Collaborative, we've known this for a while, and we're glad because of technology empowering people to live better and stay in their homes longer, that there's this thing called AgeTech as a category that so many great founders like Elizabeth and Todd are now really be able to capitalize and make aging easier for people. The options are aging or not. We want everybody to take the option of aging.
Well, yeah, that's, absolutely true. And one of the things I think is interesting that is some of the figures I've seen is that if you look at the wealth, like just wealth, not even just GDP, that's such a concentration of wealth is in the older adult community. Deborah, tell us a little bit about, you were looking at sort of the psychographics of some of these groups. You were working on trying to look at some of the ways people interact with their money as an older adult.
So this is kind of hot off the press. So we just looked at, based on financial research that we had, ways of clustering the 50 plus. And we've identified 4 clusters. And 30% of those are what we're calling, sort of measured. They are a little worried, but not terribly worried. They're not the highest income. They're sort of moderate incomes. The average age is a little over 64 years old. Again, they're 30% of the population. They're a little worried about retirement planning, but they haven't really started working on it. They're a little worried about prices rising, but they're really not doing budgets yet. Again, that's the biggest of the cluster. 30% of the 50 plus fall into this category. The good news for them, although their household income is a little lower, their debt is a little lower, which is why they're probably not as worried as some of the other clusters that we identified. We identified another cluster that we're calling like sort of the masters of money, and they are 32%. So they're a little older, not surprisingly, average 67 years old, highest income. More than half of them have incomes of over 100K. And they are worried about prices rising faster than their income, but not terribly worried. It's not something that's keeping them up late at night. Probably one of their biggest worries is fraud, but again, they're not terribly worried because they are managing their money well. We think are the ones that have been successful in preserving wealth and will continue to. Again, good chunk of the population. They're probably ones that you typically think of when you think of older people with resources. But we found another group that I think is really fascinating. Their income is similar. They've got just under 50% have more than 100K in income, but they're carrying a lot of debt. So because they're carrying a lot of debt, they are worried. They are probably among the ones most inclined to do financial planning because they are carrying so much debt. And it's kind of interesting because if you look at it from an income perspective, like, okay, income's similar to the ones that we're calling the masters of money, but because they're carrying all this debt, they have some other worries that people that with similar income don't. So this mindset around, I need to plan. They're the most likely to be looking to plan and to engage with financial planners because of the debt that they're carrying. The average age there is about 63. And then there's this other cluster that we found. They're kind of fearful financially, and they represent 18% of the population. They're the youngest. The average age is a little over 52 years old. And they're worried about all financial topics. That is outliving their retirement, fraud, you name it, because they've got lower income. 54% of them have an income between 40K and 75K. And they're carrying a fair bit of debt. And they are the ones most worried about caring for someone. So they're probably the ones that are caregivers. And I know we touched on caregivers, but because of their higher debt, lower income, and their caregiving responsibilities, they're the ones that are most worried. They're the ones that are sort of staying up at night. If anybody's losing sleep over their money, it is this group, 18%. And we identified these groups and we're like, okay, this is interesting, but what does this mean? Because typically, I think the inclination is to let's go after the ones that have the most income and are managing their money well. But they're less likely to look for resources to support them. They're less likely to be doing retirement planning. So in our work, we try to share this kind of information with all AgeTech collaborative participants, enterprises, startups, venture capitalists, you name it, because we want you to think about how then do you message to these audiences? How do you think from a product perspective? So it's not always sort of the traditional demographics that we encourage people to look at, because we've seen there are two groups making about the same amount of money, one less inclined to seek financial planning resources and help, and another more inclined. So it's really fascinating stuff. We've learned so much about the concerns of older adults in the fintech space. In general, for example, they still see traditional banks as better at things like customer service. That presents a really good opportunity for fintech organizations because they too are able to deliver excellent customer service. Concerns about, are they legitimate or is this fraudulent? And that's valid. So older adults are more likely to sort of trust the traditional names that they've known who've been around for hundreds of years. Again, we say to particularly startups, is this an opportunity for you to look at, well, how can you borrow someone else's equity in this space? So I know I've thrown on a lot out there. It's just kind of all spewing out of my brain and out of my ears.
No, that's great. I mean, that's a fascinating way to start this conversation. And just because you mentioned it, we're considering caregivers very broadly. We're thinking about anyone who has a financial relationship with an older adult where they are assisting that person, whether that's a family member or whether that's an advisor. I mean, caregivers are come in a lot of different flavors. Okay, so that's an amazing way of looking at this very diverse marketplace. Let's just take a look at some of the ways that the unique needs of this group. Like they're obviously unique needs, and you were talking about who has planning needs and who doesn't. Elizabeth, what do you see out there?
So thank you, Deborah. And AARP does amazing, really helpful research. Some of the things that I think are interesting is that obviously we all know this, but I'll just say it out. It isn't a group, right? I mean, there's millions and millions of people with a lot of different needs. There are different cultural differences. And that's a really important thing to think about. And there are a lot of different ways that people talk about money within families. And so really understanding, because what we focus on is not just older adults, but it's older adults within the families, and how people do money together is what we talk about. And there's a lot of sort of subterranean family traditions around money. And understanding, when I first started getting into this space, I thought, of course, everyone thinks about money the same way my family does. Not so fast. And so it's really interesting to think about that. Some of the things that we know that is important is there's sort of traditional use case where the man in the family does the money, does the finances, and I'm big generalizations here, sort of in the older generations. The man does the money, pays the bills, and then and that's part of taking care of his family. When he dies, the woman traditionally then doesn't have a visibility into that. That thankfully is going away, but we still see quite a bit of that with our clients. And then those people become susceptible to becoming victims of fraud or financial exploitation. So really understanding sort of some of the traditional models. There's another thing that we look at a lot is, it's a terrible term, but I'm going to use it because I'm on a committee that's using it. It's about solo agers, right? So not everyone is married, not everyone has a partner. And and there are a lot of people in that situation now. And how do those people think about money and think about aging, both from a health perspective, from a money perspective, from all of those different things. So it's one of the reasons why we think it's such an interesting market is that there are so many different types of people. There are so many different cultural norms around money. And so I was in New York at a conference a couple months ago, and I was talking to a gentleman from Israel, and then I'll stop talking, gentleman of Israel, around elder fraud and financial exploitation. He was shocked. He said, I can't believe that that happens within families. And it was sort of really interesting for him because it wouldn't happen in his country, in his culture, but it is something that, as we all know, it happens a lot within families. And so understanding some of those differences is really important.
So Todd, obviously you're dealing with families and you're also dealing with people that care for older adults in your product. Tell me a little bit about how you negotiate all of those kinds of market decisions, about how you communicate a little bit to those people and what the differences in their communication styles might be.
Yeah, I think maybe even to zoom out a bit to address this this category. And by the way, it is a category, right? So there is a world of things to build here, even as it just relates to money, right? Whether it's how they relate to their mortgages or how they relate to each other or how they relate to their financial institution or their wealth advisor or figure it out within their family. There is a category of stuff to build, right? And so what we've learned over the last 4 years, and as we started really taking off, was that understanding the dynamics of trust is really one of the most important things you can do to address anybody and successfully in this market, and the trust trust in a lot of ways, right? So there's trust in product, right? Why should I give my account information to this thing? What is the user experience, and how do you design that around enabling trust early? Trust in the channel, right? Like, are you competing with my bank? Are you partner with my bank? Are you how do you live relative to the things I already know? And how do you make sense of that for people quickly? Trust within family dynamics, right? Of like, sometimes Elizabeth totally nailed it, of like, it's oldest daughter that's gotten in there and helping out her mom or dad, because she thinks it's her. She thinks she's doing the right thing. She doesn't consider herself a caregiver. She's in there. And then you go to another family, and the last people they trust are their kids, and it's absolutely where the fraud comes from. And they much rather get scammed than give the keys to their kids, right? And so you can see in adjoining apartment units, right? They'll share a wall and they'll have that worlds apart, different dynamics. And so how you navigate and quickly work within the structures of trust is a real key to being successful here. And then to your question, Joan, what that means is really understanding how to message to different groups, right? One, knowing that you're talking to different groups, and then being able to talk about this is not about taking the keys away. This is actually about you staying in control. Or sometimes a message that we find quite compelling. Or this is something to get your time back, and that's really the need we're solving for. And then everything in between, right? And so so I think even to where Deborah started with this really kind of elegant segmentation that I think is going to be very helpful to a lot of companies in this space. Understanding how you map messaging, right, and through the trust lens to each one of those things is so important. So happy to go deeper on any of that, but that's broadly how we think about it.
Deborah, do you have any response?
I can just like amplify what you're saying, Todd, about trust. It just becomes so incredibly important. We know, for example, during the pandemic, older adults started using technology, and they are using fintech or doing online banking. So there's a degree of comfort there. Paying bills and just checking their balance are things that they're comfortable with. There's so much more in the fintech space. And how do we sort of get over that hump to, okay, I'm okay with you just using you just to look at my balance and pay my bills, but nothing else. And trust really is at the heart of it, which is where we say, and it's kind of interesting how the traditional big banks are trusted. And I think absent fintech, I don't know that the big banks are really where you would necessarily put your trust. But fintech has created this opportunity where there's this question, are they legit? Have they been around for over 100 years? So how do you bridge that gap and really close it with trust? So even if in the cases you said we're taught, it might not be the family that you trust, but it's the institution that's guarding your resources and helping you plan financially. How do you just further build that trust with them so that they, maybe in addition to the family, are a resource you look to do more than just checking your balance?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that also gets at the idea of perceived competency, which is especially when it talks about, you were talking about your masters, and your masters believe that they can do all the things that they need to do without having to have help or additional technology. But not everybody's in that position. So, and having to face that, we had a conversation before this conversation, and it's really difficult to talk about those things. Elizabeth, you were talking a little bit about when you think those conversations might happen so that maybe there'll be more of an adoption of technology.
Yeah, it's interesting because I wanted to just talk about Todd and Deborah's thing about trust. It's so important, and AARP had done some really interesting research around who older adults tend to trust in terms of asking about for financial advice. One was their financial institution or a wealth advisor. The other, which I just think was interesting, was the successful child. Right, it was the one who did well, and I just thought that was very interesting from that research. And there's another emotion I just want to lay on, which I think is important, because the concept of the emotions around money, I think, is really important to understand. It's a very emotional topic for a lot of people. There's pride, there's shame, there's all of the different things that are difficult for people to talk about, and difficult for families to talk about, and they deal with it in all different ways. And I think that's important it's important for us to understand, it's important for us to know that. And so we believe that the earlier you can have these conversations, the better, because a really difficult emotion that is hard for any of us is shame. And shame happens when people become victims of fraud or financial exploitation. It's often underreported if they do become victims for a number of reasons. And they're embarrassed of what they did or embarrassed of what they didn't. And remember that elder fraud and financial exploitation is one crime that we often still blame the victim. And so we should really not do that. Like, we all have to stop saying, "Oh, mom, why did you fall for that?" Kind of thing, because it is a crime. So we believe, I'm getting around to the answer to your question, Joan. The earlier you can have the conversation around planning for doing money together, for shared family finances, whatever that looks like, for understanding how you're sort of going to protect one another, and really enable older adults to live on their own terms, at home in many instances, or in the home of their choosing, the better, because that really helps take the emotion out of it and makes it much more of a pragmatic, how are we going to protect the legacy, how we're going to protect what people worked so hard to build. I was at the Financial Exploitation Summit in Boston 3 weeks ago, I think, and the keynote was a wonderful thought leader from AARP, and she started off by saying the awful thing that she sees is people work their whole lives to build their retirement. They do all the right things. They save and they save because they want to have this money for their retirement and their family, and they become victims, and it all goes away. And so that sort of, if we can have the conversation, and it takes really all of us on this call, but all of us in this space, to really push earlier conversations so we can plan and how we're going to care for one another.
I think that that's an interesting point. I think when you're younger and you're having these conversations younger, you can say that it's about maintaining your agency and your autonomy.
Mm-hmm.
When you get to a point where it's feeling like it's taking something away from you, that conversation is much more difficult to have.
Exactly. Yep.
So Todd, tell me about how some of the things that you're encountering when it comes to talking to both caregivers and to, the older adult themselves. What are some of the things that you're finding out?
Sure. So, the channel matters, I would say. So, not to be too tactical, but I think one of the ways a lot of companies have not succeeded in this space is they assume everyone wants an app and everyone wants or everybody wants to engage in the way that they engage. And what we found is there's this myth floating around. Actually, it might be dead by now, but it needs to die, which is that like older adults aren't tech savvy. They absolutely are. They just are. We find they're just more drawn to certain channels than others and certain modes of interaction than others. They will not connect an account number on the bus, right? Like a Robinhood account, like maybe like Gen Z would, but they absolutely will give you an account number once you've earned their trust through, let's say, desktop environment. And so we, some of the things when you build, we're inclined to build in the ways, you build for yourself accidentally sometimes, and really, which I think is a common way to mess things up. I've been building products for 15 years and for banks. This one has been really much about meeting them where they are, and they can be incredibly tech savvy, right? So we are finding, Joan, to your question, when people sign up for Careful, they really like to do that at desktop. They like to interact through email. They like to they don't want a lot of text messages. They do want a lot of other things, right? And every product has a different way. So I don't think this is one size fits all. Everything is unique to how they want to engage. But paying really close attention to where they are engaging, watching the data, watching the engagement, and then building and innovating around those channels, you can be really successful, right? You can lean into those things, and so we have found different segments, different channels has been one of the keys to success. The other has been, there are so many paths, right? By the way, I love markets that are complex, because if you're investing in them or you're building in them and you can figure them out, you've got a wonderful moat, right? And a wonderful bit of IP that you've built, right? The stuff that has no barrier to entry is no fun. And so then you're competing on a couple of things like marketing or user experience or stuff like that. And so the complexity I happen to love here and suffer from as well as we build is how many paths there are within families, and how the technology needs to meet all of those paths. And so, I think one of the things we did pretty well over the last year is get to some simplicity, and like when you sign up for yourself, you can sign up for someone else in your family, and how you add family members to the platform in a way that's more that's kind of natural. You see a lot of fintech thinking this is a feature that everyone understands. Well, actually, the act of, there are older adults that really you're taking care of. There are older adults that you want them to do it for themselves, but you want to help them out. There are older adults where you don't want them to know, and it's time for you to do it. Those are three different flows that you have to build, right? And or three different levels of permissioning. And so all that complexity, and then it goes the other way. I can think we probably mapped out, there's got to be like 75 different ways. So can you build the infrastructure? This is maybe one of the challenges, I think, to allow everybody to use it as they need to, and as their family evolves, right? And so we're seeing that to be that it took us a while to get there, but when we finally built the infrastructure to let families operate with the next generation exactly how they behave, then things really opened up and started moving for us.
That totally makes sense. Elizabeth, did you tell me about your first customer that you didn't know?
Not my mom. Yeah.
Yeah, not your mom.
Yeah.
How did you find distribution?
Yeah. So we went down the path of finding the people who were already trusted. We did not believe that older adults were going into the interwebs saying fintech so we worked with people who were already had those trusted relationships, who had the value drivers of help. Their business relied on protecting assets, and their businesses relied on adding new services to older adults. So where we got our first success was on the wealth management side, and the value drivers there was for them protecting the assets, having an early and continuous conversation with both their clients. Versus once a year, they're providing this as a service, but also solving a problem, to Todd's point, for family caregivers. So the financial caregiving, there's a lot of friction in that, And so they were interested in solving those problems for the family caregivers as well. One of the, I want to sort of riff a little bit on what Todd was talking about. One of the really interesting things in the space for our product as well is we have a tendency to be everything fast, 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 right? I want money moved here. I want it moved around. Like we want to take away friction. In the older adult space that we've worked with early on with the older adults, some level of friction, some level of like slow down is good, right? So it doesn't have to be instant. There's a feeling of safety. And I remember going through one of our first user onboarding with a user, watching them go through it, a non-family person, and they had to stop because they had to get the account funded from an external account. So ours is a new FDIC insured account, but it's funded from a checking account or another account. And so it was going to take a couple days to fund it. They liked that. They liked the sort of a level of friction in the process, and understanding that connotes safety and trust versus what my tendency is like, I want it instant. It's a really interesting thing to try to navigate. And I agree with Todd. It's a very complicated space, which is good because it's not an easy space, but understanding like what those right levels of friction are and understanding the different value drivers by channel, because different channels have different value drivers. And it's a fascinating space.
Yeah, this is a really, I think, important point about value drivers by channel, right? We also got our first big traction in wealth, and then ahead of banking, and there's different wins for that wealth advisor, right? Wealth advisor wants to see retention, and they want to see share of family, not just share of wallet. And they want to see all these things that are about their practice, not just about the end user's financial safety, but they want to, at the end of the day, they want to grow their practice. And if you can be a tool in that, right, then you have to be able to articulate that and hit that lever and show that data back to them. And so, whether you're B2B2C or direct consumer, and we're kind of both, it becomes a game of articulating really tightly like what they're gonna get, like what everybody get, like what's the WIFM, right? What's in it for me, for every single stakeholder along that chain, right? The flip side of leveraging someone else's trust, like a financial institution, wealth platform, we're partnered with a few, is you sometimes the B2B sale works, then are they going to turn around and do that last B2C? And so what makes them really do it with and how do you give them incentive to do those things, right? You see plenty of people, depending on what's in fashion, right? Direct consumer in fashion, now it's out of fashion. Okay, so fine, so let's go B2B. And then suddenly they're not able to get that last mile, which is like the last B2C. Like they haven't, you can sell it into an advisor, but what makes an advisor do anything? Given how they actually plan their day. And so getting their share of being really tight on those value drivers is core to that last mile. We find, particularly with banks, credit unions, and
yeah, actually my experience with banks is that you have to train the trainer. You have to really get a lot of buy-in at very different levels of the bank for the bank to be able to have the comfort to be able to take that trusted relationship and extend it for your product.
Yeah.
I'm going to do a little bit of a left turn here, if it's okay, and say, Deborah, I know that you've been working with, incubating a whole variety of solutions. And one of the things I hear a lot is, I wish there was more capital in this space. There was more people investing in this space. Tell me about what you're seeing about the investment that's going on into this space, and some of the things that some of your partners and things that you're seeing there. And then I'm going to ask both Elizabeth and Todd to talk about sort of searching for capital and how capital comes into the space and what we need to do to make sure that more companies that are dealing with these problems can exist.
Good. Before I get to that, I just want to sort of go back to something, Elizabeth, you said that I thought was really powerful. And that is, it's okay to slow down. And one of the things we say, but don't talk down.
Oh.
And, it really matters when you are dealing with older adults, the language that you use. Little things like our research has shown, for example, baby boomers is preferable to boomers. Seniors is okay. And some of the typical ones that you think would be offensive, but really are, but never talk down. Particularly now that we know You know, gosh, over 90% of people over 50 have smartphones, and they acknowledge when it comes to technology, they're probably not capitalizing on all the features that exist, but they're comfortable with technology. So that's which I think lends itself to this idea of investing in the sector. I mean, we have known for the longest time that the aging population is growing, and we are thrilled to see that people, investors, are coming in, recognizing that there's an opportunity here, that the longevity economy, the market is real and it's solid, and importantly, goes beyond just health. You know, we look at startups and solutions in the space of loosely defined as health, wealth, and self. And no individual lives in a silo, but we are glad to see and bring into the fold investors and startups that are looking beyond healthcare. Yes, they over-index on the use of the healthcare systems, but there's so many other areas in the life of the older person as we live longer and work to live better, that there are opportunities presented. So we're thrilled to see that investment is starting to come, and we've got a really nice sort of fold of investors in the collaborative, and looking to bring even more on as there's this realization that the economy, the longevity economy, is just going to get bigger. You know, that 8 trillion gets to 34 trillion in no time at all.
So how as entrepreneurs, how do you attract money into a business like this?
Todd, do you want to?
Yeah. So, I mean, wouldn't call it breaking news, but we closed our A round of funding 2 weeks ago.
That's breaking news. Congratulations.
Thanks. Haven't announced it yet, but it was a great process. Big raise, like old times, and we'll put out an announcement in about 2 weeks. And so we're thrilled, but I think it's pretty fresh experience on the capital raise that we ran over the summer. So I mean, a couple of things to share about it. One, every capital source has aging demographics sitting somewhere on PowerPoint, right? That's both nice, but also a problem because they understand it at various varying degrees. And I can probably tell you now who those 6 or 7 who really deeply understand it. Given that we're talking about fintech, I would say I like fintech investors a lot more than broad generalist investors for this space, for what we're talking about here, because at the end of the day, they're going to get right into your business and talk, and we'll be able to talk about how we get this market, not that there is a market. I think if you're spending any time raising money trying to explain that there is a market, like this is a staggeringly large opportunity that's getting bigger, not smaller, right? So if you have to make that case, then it probably isn't. But you're going to be about 3 meetings in before you find out this is not a group that knows what they're talking about. I think to the other issue, I think one of the other issues with capital raising in this environment is it's not the beginning of it. I think there's been about a decade of starts and stops, right? And I think you have to acknowledge, if you look at the past 10 years, I can name 5 of them, right? Of really smart, well-intentioned, not terrible products, solving a real problem, right? Didn't have a go-to-market necessarily, didn't have a or lacked something around it. And so I think there's a feeling of some capital sources that like either it can't be cracked or that I want to see somebody get there, right? And that puts more pressure on folks getting in here because they want to say, okay, I prove it. As I've seen 5 of these, right? Or I've seen 5 people in and around this space. So I think often those who are raising money are raising money against some preconceived notion that this is really tough, and that means you have to show traction, and you have to show that you have cracked something and understand something deeply. And I think where we were able to find some success this summer is we were able to cut off the noise and focus really on that, on the fact that we've been around 4 years, we've cracked this product market fit there, like the basic hygiene of a raise. But what do we know, and what can we repeat, and what can we scale, right? And when you keep the focus right there, it's no longer about the ecosystem and does it exist. It's about like, why are you gonna win in this ecosystem? And I think that's really a powerful lane to run if raising money in this environment, in this market today.
That's amazing. Elizabeth?
Yeah, I think Todd's point about people, you can see right away if people understand. Like first 5 minutes, you're like, oh boy, like I don't have time to explain the space to you. Like it's just lovely to meet you. Thank you so much. But people who do get it, for us, it's been people who so you're talking to investors, you're also talking to people,
Yeah.
right? So they're people behind those investments. And if they've had an experience in this space, if they've had the experience with caring for an older adult family, it's you can see it in their face and you can see it in them understanding it. And if they want to believe in it, that's where all our investment came from. It's come from, we have not gone to a Series A. We are all private funding right now, but all we've got family offices, we've got a bank holding company, and we've got sort of high net worth individuals. All of them know the space. All of them have felt the space. And it really is an emotional connection to the need. And when I started working in the aging space, which was about 10 years ago, and I tell people I worked in aging, they were like, oh God, that's really interesting, and sort of walk the other way. Right now, it's gotten to be a much bigger, well-known opportunity, sort of like the longevity economy that Deborah's talking about. People are starting to understand that, and they're seeing it as a really big business opportunity, and they're just trying to get their heads around understanding it. So I think it's great. I think that more funds, more venture funds are coming in. Family offices are coming in. They're really understanding it, and they're seeing it both for a big problem that needs to be solved. And a lot of people are also seeing it. And that's one of the things that I'm solving it for my future self, because hopefully I'm going to be able to get there. I mean, aging is a blessing that we should all enjoy every day. And so I want to sort of build the infrastructure for me as well. And I think a lot of our investors see that as well.
Those are interesting sources of capital, and that is something that is the lifeblood of every organization. I hope that one day I can say I knew you when there's $1 billion exit and it's one of the two of you, or maybe both of you, which is great, because those exits are something that people look for, investors look for, because then they see that as a recognition of other investors that. Yeah.
Joan, if I could maybe add one more really tactical thing on that. That's just a quick one. Strategics are sort of the middle tier, I think, of in funding, and you cannot throw a rock without finding a captive insurance company, reinsurance company, card firm, whatever, who has this on their roadmap that they're trying to do something with. So if you're out there, looking to, I don't think it's a great place to start for early, because there's lots of challenges with strategics. It happens not to be my favorite. We didn't take it this round, but it's there, right? And if you're looking to bring people to the table, you often can find a pilot partner, right, or a proof of concept partner a little earlier there. You'll just spend a ton of time with them, but I would put it out there as a source of funding that is very plugged into this space right now. I don't think you can.
And sometimes that comes with distribution.
Yes,
sometimes those two things go together, which is
it comes with the promise of distribution always, right? I think that it's the question of often the VC is not connected to the business, so they have the same brand and their job is to go put money in. But where I sort of caution is you'll get a lot of attention from them, but the pressure you have to put back is can they really tap that channel? And then to your point, Joan, it could be great.
Okay, so Deborah, you want to weigh in on any of that conversation before I ask my next question?
Well, I was just going to say, I think both Elizabeth and Todd mentioned it. If there is a there, if you are solving a real problem, I think particularly in the technology space, technology just for the sake of technology is not going to advance the mission that we set about. But if you are solving a real problem, so you have a viable solution to a real problem in the marketplace, that there are people who would be willing to pay for it, whether it is, B2C or B2B, then we support you. We have an accelerator program, and startups will pitch to us. And I think it's probably less than 10% of the startups that pitch to us actually come into the program. Because what we want to see is that there really is a there. You're solving a real problem, and it's not just cool technology on display. So because of that, we think, yeah, it's a huge market, but there are real problems to be solved in it. And great if it's cool technology that you're leveraging, but at the end of the day, it's about solving problems.
Okay, well, that's going to bring us up to, we could talk about a lot of different things. Like there's things that we haven't brought up. And if anyone wants to bring up a specific subject matter, this would be a great time. But because we haven't talked about talent or any of those kinds of things. But what other, if I'm a entrepreneur out there and I'm thinking about solving one of those very hard problems, what are some of the resources that you would use? I mean, obviously there's the accelerator at AARP, which is an amazing program. What kind of resources are out there? How are you meeting other people in the space? Where are there conferences, books, websites that you suggest? Are there experiences that really helped you along?
AARP AgeTech Collaborative, just another plug for them. Amazing organization. Really pitch to get in if you're interested in the space, because they're a great resource, great support, wonderful organization. There are some great books that have come out recently. People are starting to write more about it. There's a book called Stage Not Age, which is a really good book by Susan Golden. The Measure of Our Age is a more recent book by M.T. Conley. Amazing. Like there's some really wonderful things being written to understand the market. The Stanford Center for Longevity does great work as well. Really great thought leaders there. They have great webinars and things like that. MIT Age Lab has been a leader in the space as well, and they have a whole financial sector that they focus on. What else, Todd? Insurance companies have there's insurance accelerators as well that are focused on the aging space. There's a lot that's bubbling up now. It is definitely becoming more of a place that people are talking about, reading about, and want to be a part of.
Yeah. No, Elizabeth nailed the list. I think that would be my list as well.
Does anybody know anything about how to, I have recently had a startup ask me about working with the government as a whole. Like, is there resources about how to do that? Because they really think that it's either state government or a federal kind of charter that they would need that kind of support.
So the NIA, the National Institute of Aging, has they're investing a ton of money in the space. And they have great resources, all with grants, non-dilutive grants. But states also have, and each state sort of has resources that they will help. Each state tends to have an innovation center, and they will help with accessing those grants. And then the Administration on Community Living is a national resource that is amazing. And they have a lot of resources and information about aging. And the area agencies on aging, just for sort of general knowledge, are across the country in community, and they're on the ground people working with aging, and they do amazing work. So there's a sort of a web of really interesting resources across the country at a state level and at a national level.
Want to add anything to that, Deborah or Todd?
I gotta say, agetechcollaborative.org.
There you go.
There you go.
Check
There you
us
go.
So so far we don't have any questions coming from the audience, but I have one last question, which is, it is about talent, since we have a little moment to be able to say that, which is, some people say that it's hard to find people who are young people that want to work in the space. And I say that great fintech opportunities attracts all sorts of talent, no matter what. Yeah, I mean, is there any special resources that you know of to find great people to work on your solutions?
Go ahead, John. I disagree with that. It's hard to find young people to work in this space. Young people, I think that 25% of caregivers are younger than 24. So they get the space at an emotional level, and especially now with the current generation wanting to work on meaningful things. I mean, I think that that is a really important thing to tap into. And so when people want to work on something that is going to make a difference in their lives and the lives of others, it's a great space. And so that's sort of, that aside, I don't have a secret for finding great talent. That's one of the most rewarding and most challenging parts of building a company. I think Todd can attest to, is finding and building the right team. And so for us, it's we live and work in Atlanta in a great ecosystem, a fintech center, and it's talking, and really meeting the right people who are going to be aligned with our goals and our values, and have the talent to go with it. But I think young people, when they love it.
They do. I totally agree. You know, we are in a perfect moment where you can't, you know, there are plenty of young people, everything from design to engineering talent, that loves fintech but doesn't love trying to get a few basis points off of a credit card swipe. Isn't really motivating to them anymore. And to you know, join something that actually does something good. Like there are, I think, 2 generations behind us now that want to do that, right? And really, in fact, I hate to say it, but they'll take less to do that. They will they will join in, and they'll make it, they'll feel ownership of it, because it has a real impact on families. So I think it has always been a case of folks like to build for themselves and their friends. And so over the last 20 years, and if you look at product development, you see a lot more created. And I think that's a little where that comes from. But as you know, as the best thing you can do is be out there and successful, and people want to join. And so be on stage, someone will come up to you afterward, announce your new bank partnership, announce your new wealth tech platform partnership, and people will come out of the woodwork. I would almost say there haven't been enough great companies for them to join, more than they don't want to join them. And so Elizabeth's absolutely right. The talent is there. Hiring is always going to be hard.
It is.
Yeah.
But I think the other thing, I think young people are great, but I think older adults are also great. I just want to call that out, because we've got some, I think, you know, talent comes in all different generations. And so people who have had really successful careers and now are looking for something that's more meaningful to them personally, and really want to be a part of building something that is going to make a difference. That's awesome, because there's some great experience out there, especially now, that are looking for an opportunity to really work on something that's going to change the world potentially.
Great point.
Yeah, I actually have met a lot of great entrepreneurs in the space that are older than the average founder, but because they have the personal attack, you know, and they've had a long successful career in fintech, they're now focusing some of their efforts there. So I think that's a good point, is that there's a lot of talent of a lot of different ages. So Deborah, do you want to bring us home? You want to talk about the kind of people that you find in the accelerator and why people are energized by the space?
I think it's 2 things. You know, there's back to, if it matters that you're doing something meaningful, that's going to impact lives. You know, longevity. AgeTech is a place where you can impact lives and make a difference. And if you are just in it for the money, look at the size of the economy. So there's opportunities, no matter which side or which entrance way you want to come into. It is because it's personal passion or you just want to make money. They're both there, and you can do both. So when we look at startups, you know, we are a not-for-profit. We are a mission-driven organization, AgeTech Collaborative from ARP. We're mission-driven, but most of our startups are not-for-profit. So they see an opportunity, but it is also solving a real problem that, by the way, helps like a real person. And I can't tell you how many of our startups have really touching stories about something, grandma, grandpa, that impacted their lives and led them down this particular path that, hey, good news is not just affecting and making life better for your grandparent, but for millions around the world. And you're going to make money doing it because you're solving a real problem.
And it's really interesting because right now there's still the wall, which is you have an experience in your life and you're a daughter or you're a older person, and then all of a sudden you run into the wall, which is you know, maybe it's an older person realizing that they can't hear when the phone is being picked up again to confirm their identity. And they're like, okay, now what am I going to do about this? Or maybe it's a child of an adult child saying, okay, well, you know, how am I going to make sure that we can pay his caregiver in a way that makes sense? There's still a wall where there's just, you come up against it, and therefore there's this problem. And therefore there's a huge market for solutions that make sense, that can be presented at the right moment. So you know, you are going to make a huge difference in the lives of others if you can figure out how to solve some of those problems and be there at the right moment. Well, I think that wraps it up, unless anyone has a concluding statement they want to make. Actually, let's just do that. Like one sentence each about, like, if you were talking to this young entrepreneur out there, or this medium, you know, middle-aged entrepreneur that says, I'm going to take this on, one sentence of advice. Can you do it?
I will. Yep, I will. I'm going to go off of Deborah's thing. I was that person. I was that daughter who experienced this with my father. I left what I was doing, not because I'm a wonderful altruistic person, although I wanted to solve the problem. But I saw both this huge problem, but there's also a huge economic opportunity. So it is not just, there's a lot of business opportunity in this space. It's hard. It's complicated. It is not for the faint of heart, but it's the best thing you'll ever do if you are really committed to it. And we had a great keynote speaker from Jim Van de High at a couple of weeks ago with the AgeTech Collaborative, and he said, this experience, you will learn more about yourself and others than any other experience in the world. If you're committed to it, do it. There's a huge personal opportunity and a huge economic opportunity in the space.
Todd?
There's room for great products. There's a vacuum of for great products, a lot of interest, but and there's plenty of money, plenty of capital to get your thing going, right? And that is a pretty unique ecosystem relative to metaverse and trending and all the things that come and go and become incredibly crowded. There is space for you. There's space for your idea. There's money for your idea, right? And so I would say, if you're an entrepreneur, I can't think of a better landscape than that.
And we'll end it with you, Deborah. If you have one more sentence you'd say.
Know what you're solving for. Make sure that you really are solving a problem. There are lots of unmet needs that need to be solved. Be clear on what you're solving for.
Great advice, all. Thank you very much. This has been a wonderful conversation. Time just flew by. The video will be available, so we'll be passing it on through a lot of people that I know are interested in seeing it. So thank you very much.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.